My name is Ravi Khan. I am the Chief Imagineer at Imagine Coworking. To talk a little bit about why we started this workshop series and Imagine as a whole is this really is born out of my experience in working with business owners over the last 23 years. And what I have found is that most people are challenged in one of two ways. Either they don't have all the tools necessary to help them achieve the business success that they would like, or they're not familiar with how to use the tools that they actually have. And both are as impactful to negatively keeping you from what you want to achieve, both in life and within your business. So really, Imagine Coworking is a concept around building a community of folks that can leverage mentorship through people's expertise that have had success in different verticals and different areas. And so as we continue to do these workshops, the intention is to bring people in that have proven track records of success with the various subject matters that we're going to discuss, and allow individuals in business, individuals that might be in a sales capacity, those that want to grow and have a more successful and happier future as it relates to their overall well-being, their business potentially being part of that, or their sales being part of that, can leverage all of the tools and the how-to of those tools through the information that we can deliver. So today, as our inaugural workshop, I thought it only fitting to talk about business planning and some of the tools necessary to create an effective business plan, some of the action items that you can use for accountability of that business plan, and inevitably, what are some of the results that come from implementing that? What are some of the joys that come from a proper business plan and executing that? And what are some of the struggles and anxiety and stress that come from either not having a business plan, not having that tool, or not utilizing it effectively, which again creates just as much, sometimes even more stress and anxiety when you're thinking about why you're not achieving the goals and the life that you ultimately want. And I can share all of these experiences specifically today, both from personal experience and through the lens of how I've worked with other people on some of the challenges and some of the success. What I have found over time, and this is a culmination of a lot of those lessons, is that one, I've learned some things the hard way, and two, I've learned a lot from other people's mistakes, which has allowed me to then take that information and those tools and put it to good use. So I don't have to have the same mistakes, make the same mistakes, and learn from my own failures. I can learn from other people. And as a result of that, that's going to help me accelerate my growth and my learning. And as a result of that, achieve better happiness and success around accomplishing all of the things that I set out for. I've been a serial entrepreneur, and I've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people in business, in sales capacities, in the financial services sector, as well as many other industries and verticals over the last 23 years achieve some of their wildest dreams. And what I have found is the reward for me is shaping the legacy of what that ultimately means, not just for them and their happiness, but for future generations, for the people they surround themselves with. And so these workshops and Imagine as a whole is really a way for me to take some of those lessons and give back in a larger way, and to leverage people that I have met along that journey as other mentors and be able to bring their story and some of their successes to light so that everybody can really benefit and have some of that success of what it means, not again just for them, but for future generations and the legacy of achieving the goals that they have. And when we talk about goals, and this, although this is called business planning, it's really about personal life planning. What do you want your life to look like? What is that vision? If you could close your eyes and say, here's what I would love for my life to look like, your business is not the end all. It shouldn't even be the largest part of that. Maybe it doesn't even come into that vision that you have in terms of what you want your life to look like, but it is a catalyst to help you achieve it. And so what we want to focus on is really, what is the vision that you have of your life, and how is your business going to become that conduit to help you achieve all of those things? And so as we go through today, I would just ask you to keep that in mind, is that we may talk a little bit about, and I would encourage you to think about your personal vision, your personal story. Everybody has a story. You have a past, you have a present, and you have a future. And what's fascinating is, if you want to know where you are, look to your past. If you want to know where you're going, look to the present. And that's something that is really critical of showing up today. Does two things. One, it takes courage. And two, it takes commitment. And so now it will only be a function of what kind of courage and commitment are you willing to take beyond today to continue to work towards these things, stay focused, face adversity, and achieve some of the things that you want. Because the truth is, there is nothing easy. There's nothing easy in business. There's nothing easy in sales. There's nothing easy in life. If you want to go run a marathon, you got to train for it. You want to build $1 million business, you got to train for it. You want to have 30 hours a week that you get to spend with your kids and your family instead of working, you got to train for it. So all of these things require commitment. They require adversity that you are guaranteed to face, and they require continued committed effort to make that happen. So a couple things that I'd like to talk about as we go through today. So when we think about a 3-year vision and what that ultimately means, again, I would ask you to, whether you close your eyes or whether you keep them open, really think about a couple things that are going to be part of what goes into that vision that you have for yourself. One would be, what does your time look like? How are you spending your week? We all have a finite amount of time and hours. That's the same. So the good news is we're all working from the same cup, right? We all have a finite amount of time that we are willing to allocate. Now, some may argue that and say, well, you have less commitments. You don't have a family. You don't have a significant other. You don't have a business. You have more time than I do. No, that's false. We all have priorities, but we all have 168 hours in a week. And what now the question is how do you want to spend those 168 hours? What are your priorities? And for you, that should be unique. That's not going to be the same as everybody else, which also means that you can't follow the exact same path as somebody else. You need to adapt it to you and make it personal. So creating a vision is about your personal objective with those 168 hours. What I would say, though, is you need to be thinking about there's some things that you are going to have to include in those 168 hours that we all need. We need sleep. We need to have some health, personal health, and personal time. And whether that is time spent taking walks, whether that's time spent exercising, whether that's time spent meditating, whether that's time spent contemplating, you have to have personal time and space. And you need to allocate it, because if you don't, guess what? A lot of times we put that at the bottom of the list. And as a result of that, then it's really hard to be able to, one, plan for things, and it's really hard to be able to have follow-up and take a look at how are we doing? What is the accountability and the results that we're attaining? Everything has to be measurable. One of the big things we're going to talk about today is how do we set up to be success? We have to have measurable goals, and then we have to be able to monitor that and evaluate how are we doing. So when you think about your 168 hours, one big consideration is going to be how much time are you allocating towards sleep? How much time are you allocating towards health? How much time are you allocating towards family, whether that's significant other, kids? I might even break that down independently. Other family obligations that you have, maybe you feel necessary, maybe you do have necessary that you have to take care of other people in your sphere, whether that's friends, whether that's family. How much time are you going to commit to those people? And again, this is not being rigid or inflexible, but it's having a baseline. If you don't have any objective, well, then we're just going to all kind of move through things in a forward path, in a forward direction, meaning we're just taking one step at a time. A big part of what we're talking about today is start with the end in mind and work backwards, because the likelihood of achieving success will be substantially different, 2 to 3x different, if you can actually start with the end in mind and begin to build a plan of what you need to do today to accomplish that 3-year vision. So step one is thinking about how we're going to allocate those 168 hours is critical. Now you have potentially a business, or you have your career or your job that you also have to find time for. So when people say, well, I'm just going to work, I'm going to do whatever's necessary for this. Well, I already know you're going to set yourself up for failure. Why do I know that? Because you haven't given yourself a plan for how you're going to do that. And what that means is you're going to sacrifice all these other things along the way. Well, you have a problem now of your values, because you might value family over work, but now you're going to do everything that is possible to achieve your work results. Now, others might say, I'm willing to commit X to my business, so I got to figure out how to maximize the value of that time. So that's a big part of what we're focused on today, is not that you should have to do more. It's that if you're already working 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, how do you get 2 and 3x the exponential results from that same utilization of time? You have to do different things than what you do today. because we all have heard that the definition of insanity is to continue to do the same things over and over and expect different results. So if we can all agree that if you're going to work the same amount of time as you work today, then the objective is to do different things to achieve a 2 and 3x the result. If your objective is, I want to work less, great. Then go from a 50, 60, 40-hour a week to 30, 20, because you want to commit to other values, other priorities in your time. Maybe it's more sleep. Maybe it's more of your personal space and health. Maybe it's family time. No problem. That's totally attainable. But you have to have a plan then on how you do things different than you're doing today, because guess what? If you're spending 40 hours a week on your career, your business today, and you have an expectation that you're going to get the same results and work 20 hours, it isn't going to happen. You're setting yourself up for failure. So what it requires is, first and foremost, an understanding that you will have to be uncomfortable. You will have to move in a direction of doing things that are not what you're doing today. And guess what? That's uncomfortable. All change is uncomfortable. It's inevitable, but it's really uncomfortable. So one of the first things that we're going to accept is, I'm going to choose to be uncomfortable because I want to obtain different results. And so when we think about this 3-year plan, I really want you to think about, what are your priorities? What are the things that are constraints? You might say, this is a non-negotiable for me. I would just ask you, please be very aware of what you're making a non-negotiable. I have watched a lot of people say, want to achieve this level of career or business success, and these are my constraints. And I respond and I say, well, it's unattainable. So the reality is, you can't achieve what you want. And usually they push back because they don't want to hear that answer. They say, well, I'll figure it out. And my answer is, okay, good luck. But the reality is, you will be highly unlikely to achieve that because you've created too many constraints on your ability to grow. And so as a result of that, you're not giving yourself space to not only do the tasks that you have to continue to do. If you're working 40 hours a week today, guess what? You got to keep working 40 hours a week, but you also got to grow. And in that growth period, you're going to have to push your capacity beyond what you're currently doing. You don't just all of a sudden start doing different activities. You got to keep doing what you're doing while growing. And how do I know that? Use any analogy that you think of. Use cooking, use exercise, use teaching kids things. You don't just shift gears. Think about when you're teaching your kids, it's repetition, right? You have to be able to show them something. You have to keep showing them the same thing and then add new things to it while you continue to show them the same things over and over again. We're the same creatures. We're just older. We just forgot that that's how we have to grow and how we have to learn. So as a result of putting this together, you're going to have to commit the same time that you have now, and also more time initially during this growth phase, to figure out how are you going to improve upon all the things that you're doing so that you have a more effective path, a more effective plan to do that. So those are a number of the things that we're going to talk about today. Hopefully that gives you some context to why do you want to do these things, because ultimately it comes down to happiness. And what I can share is, most people are happy not because they make more money, not because they necessarily even work less. They're happy because they're on a path and they feel confident in who they are, and they're confident in the results that they're going to achieve from continuing to do the same activities. That's what breeds happiness, is ultimately a confidence of, I know where I'm going to land if I do the following things. And the only way you really get there is start with the end in mind, start with a goal. And exercise is an easy one to use. I use that analogy a lot because if I think about running a marathon, many people can get up off the couch and just go run. And a couple of things are going to happen. One is, you might finish a marathon, but you won't run a marathon. It's very rare that somebody's going to, from stagnation, all of a sudden achieve the success and the opportunity to compete to do that. And if what we're talking about here is competing, not against others, but against yourself to obtain something that you're not presently achieving, then you have to understand that it's going to require effort. It's going to require training. And that's what we're going to put in place today. So what are some of the opportunities that come with doing that? Why create a business plan? Well, one, it makes the growth that I do. So going back to now, if I have tools to help me be effective and I know how to use those tools, my ability to move through things is going to get accelerated. And if you think about this, it's kind of like the neurons in your brain. The more that I have in there, the more information I feed it, the more that I have an opportunity to, because I've experienced it or because somebody else has experienced it and given me feedback. This can come, by the way, from mentorship, which is what we're doing today. This can come from books that you read. This can come from one-on-one training. This can come from failures that you learn from those mistakes and enhance it. I would just encourage everybody that learning from your own mistakes is way more painful and time consuming than learning from somebody else. And again, there's a lot of ways to learn from other people. It doesn't all have to be an expensive proposition. It can be through reading books. It can be through talking to people. It can be through organizing a group of like-minded people, not the people where you are, not where you sit, but the people you want to become, right? So your tribe, if you will, or your group of people that you collaborate with is going to be a direct result of some of the success that you're going to achieve. And so having all of these different things in place is part of achieving this vision. So what are the benefits of that? Well, we just talked about you're going to grow tremendously faster. And it's like an acceleration. And if you think about this from a moment, I'm going to give you an analogy. Picture for a minute that I'm in the bottom of a pit. And it's a dark, scary pit. And at the bottom of most pits, if you dig them deep enough, it's filled with water. It's filled with mud and muck. If I want to get out of that, whatever that looks like is your present day. And maybe it's not that ugly. Maybe where you feel like you are is already a rosier version. But if you're wanting to grow, then we all have to accept that that means we have to move up, right? We want to get to somewhere beyond where we are today. So your pit might be shallower than others, but either way, we're all in some kind of a stagnation. We're all in some kind of a pit. Well, guess what? As I begin to climb out of that pit, a couple things are going to happen. As I get closer and closer to achieving the success that I want, that destination, the top of that, it starts getting less wet. It starts getting less slippery. So all of these things, my factors, my environment is going to shift, which is going to make it easier for me to move through that process. The other thing that happens is, just like anything, the more and the longer that I climb and the more time I dedicate to growing in my art of climbing, I go faster. I'm more skilled at the exercise. So part of putting together a plan and holding yourself accountable to that plan is having clear priorities, taking some of the risk out of the equation, which again comes from start with the end in mind, work through those, how are you going to allocate your 168 hours, and then evaluate what are the resources available to me today, and then what additional resources do I have to go out and find that are going to help me be most effective with this. So which area do you want to focus on for the next 3 years? By the way, when I put together a business plan, my business plan, and we're going to go through some of this in a moment. And if you have questions as we go through this, please, again, ask them in the chat, and if I can't address it here, I'll address it as a follow-up. When I go through business planning, I like to think about it in 3 ways. I have business goals, I have personal goals, and I have self-development goals. And often some of those overlap. There might be some areas where some of my self-development actually will enhance some of my personal or my business goals. But I think of business planning really, or I think of planning, I should just say, when I talk about a 3-year vision, as really thinking about who is the person I want to be? What does my life look like? How am I interacting with the world? How am I interacting with people around me? For me, that's what's important. Again, you can define it differently, but I like to think about it as, what is that going to look like? And because that's going to shape my experience. And that's what's important to me. If I can shape my experience, then I can be happy in knowing where I am and where I'm going. Okay. So what are some components of things when you define these? So let's talk about how we define now what those might look like. So business goals, that could be define. Can everybody see these slides, by the way? Can you see the full extent of the slides on the screen? Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. So when we think about business goals, and again, think 3 years out, and then we'll work back to what are some of the action items that we need to do today to get there. It could be drive company growth. Well, what does that mean? Are we going to measure profitability? Are we going to measure sales? What are we going to define as our first matrix that we want to evaluate that we think is going to help us achieve some of the results that we ultimately want? And maybe those results are more income, more cash flow in your pocket. Maybe those results are, I want to grow my business. So I want to be able to take it from here to here. Those results might be, I want to create a legacy business that I can incorporate and bring in other friends, family. I want to go acquire another business. What's the driver behind what you want to achieve, right? What is it going to be? So those would be some business goals. Other business goals might be, I want to expand my team. I want to be able to work less. I need to have a bigger resource team. Maybe it's I need to expand my technology. But ultimately, if I want to work less as a business goal, and I would encourage, we'll get to in a minute, defining that a little better using SMART as an acronym for how you define your goals. If I want to work less, now I'm going to begin to evaluate, okay, what resources do I have available to help me achieve that end? When we talk about personal goals, it's really things like spending time with family, your health, lifestyle choices, which could encompass a whole number of things. Do you want to cut back on your sugar intake? Do you want to have less alcohol in your diet? Do you want to have salt? You want to improve a metrics of your blood pressure, my whatever that might be. Those could be personal goals. Self-development goals could be, how are you going to grow? And what I would encourage, and I tell you this from personal experience, is that I believe as human beings, we are conditioned for growth. And when we are not growing, we feel that throughout our entire body. All of our body holds on to stress, anxiety, trauma, and growth is a means to break those things. Growth is a mechanism for us to be able to conquer anything. Our minds and our bodies as human beings are ultimately infinitely powerful. I really believe that. I'm not getting into a mystical approach to this, but I do believe that our bodies and our minds are capable of way more than we ever give them credit for. And the only way that we accomplish that is a commitment to growing whatever it is that we want to get better at. And it might just be mindfulness. It might be understanding where we are today. It might be learning a new skill related to our business. So maybe part of your business goals and self-development goals is I want to learn a new vertical of revenue. So if today I do X and Y, and these are two ways that I make money, I want to learn to add a third means to generate income, because I see that as a path to where I can have a collaboration of what I'm already doing with something new. Well, you got to grow. You got to go learn that thing, or you got to bring somebody in that has that skill and figure out how you're going to incorporate that into your business. So again, I would encourage, when you think about this, try to define it as, in 3 years, I want my life to look like X, and then start working backwards. And so when we think about 3 years, how do we break up then working backwards to today? So that's the other big component of this, is now I have an idea, or you begin to ruminate on, and when you start this process, you need to do a brainstorm. It's not being selective about the things that you put on paper. You literally just do a brain dump of all the things that you've thought of, put them all together. Now, what we're going to define is maybe they're not all achievable in 3 years, or collective, we can't accomplish them all together because our 168 hours just doesn't allow, right? We're going to have to make some sacrifices. Maybe this is more important. We might have to prioritize. So now, where do we begin? We begin 3 years out from now. That's 36 months from today. That's a long way away. What I'm going to begin to do is start now whittling that back to say, okay, well, if this is where I want to be in 36 months, where do I need to be in 24 months to be on a path to achieve those goals? And keep in mind, everything is an acceleration. So it's not linear. When we talk about growing and working towards our goals, it is not a consistent, I have to achieve in the next 90 days, and then consistently the same 90 days is going to be the same results to get me to my 36-month goal. It doesn't work that way. What's going to happen is you're going to start out slowly, right? It's just like training for that marathon. I can't all of a sudden start training and running my 18 miles. I'm going to start out really slow. But guess what? By the time I get closer and closer to that 36 months, my objective, I've now ramped up. So the speed at which that growth is happening is likely 2 or 3x what it was during my first 90 days. So when you think about the business plan, what I want to make sure that you understand is this is not about just trying to create and then linear move through it. And when I say linear, what that means is equal parts every quarter. That's not how it works. What's going to happen is I'm going to start with 36 months. Then I might have half of that as my 24-month goal. So let's use an example of this to make it a little bit more defined. If I know that I want to generate $500,000 a year in income, my objective might be that I want to generate $250,000 to $300,000 in income in 24 months. Because I know that I can accelerate during that 24 to 36 months by the things that I start to do today are going to get me to my objective within that window of time. Now, again, every business is going to be a little bit unique in terms of your ability to grow and how exponential that can happen. There are certain constraints that we have in different industries. But as a general rule of thumb, that would be a pretty good benchmark. Now, if I work backwards to 12, again, it's going to not be half. It's going to have to be a bigger number. So it might actually be, if I want to achieve 250,000 after 24 months to get to my 500,000 after 36, well, then after 12 months, I might need that number to be like 175. Do you see how this is a pattern here, right? My growth from 12 to 24 is going to be a little slower than the growth that happens from 24 to 36. Well, now if I have a 1-year goal, now if I've taken my vision of things and I've moved it back to 1 year, now I'm going to start to begin to take action items each 90 days that is going to move me in a direction of accomplishing my 12-month goal. Because now I've defined my 1 year. Now I can work with that. I have my 3-year vision. I'm not going to lose sight of that. That's my plan. But I'm going to try to break it back to, what do I have to do tomorrow? What do I have to do for the next 90 days that's going to put me on track to achieve my 1-year goal, which in turn will put me on course to achieve my 36-month goal. And what we know is that when you have a structured plan that lays these things out, your ability to grow accelerates, and your ability to have success is literally 2 to 3x. And so we could define that as anything. Money is an easy one. I don't want to make the assumption that money is everybody's goal. And I don't believe that it necessarily should be the driving force at all of your happiness. It's just one of the most measurable things that we can use. So often we use that as an objective, largely because it can create time, right? If I want to make a certain amount of income, then I can say, okay, for me to be happy, I need to make X. Now I want to figure out, how do I make X on less time that I have to commit to that objective? Because that time is what I'm gaining back that I get to spend on other things that are important to me, right? But it might be, if money is your motivator and you say, hey, I make 200,000 a day, I want to make $1 million today. Great, good for you. And it might be that I'm going to work the same amount of hours and get there. We just have to now be realistic on what's the time frame to make that happen. So start with your objectives, and then we'll work backwards on, is that realistic to the things that you can put in place today? So we've talked a little bit about defining your objectives. How do we do that? So I'm going to give you some examples. I'm also going to send out, post this workshop, a template for you to be able to utilize to put together a business plan. It's a very simple, there's really complicated ones out there. We're going to give you a simple, watered down version, because I find that sometimes simple is best, right? I'd rather have a very simple plan that can be executed flawlessly than have a very complicated, when I have a whiteboard and it's got 40 things on it, it's overwhelming. When I have a whiteboard and there's 3 things on it, I can look at that every day and I can figure out, am I doing the things I need to do towards these 3 things? And that's really the objective. Is we want to, doesn't mean you can only have 3 goals. It just means that we have to be able to only focus on so many things at any one point in time, so we can focus really well on them. Somebody once gave me a great piece of advice many, many years ago, which I've never forgotten, I think of very often. And it's that results follow attention. And when they said that, what they mean is, what you pay attention to is where you will have the results. If in your mind you're negative, guess what? Your life's going to be negative. If in your mind you think that I'm only capable of X, guess what? You're only capable of X. If in your mind you're infinite and you have objectives that you write down, and your objective is to now figure out, what are the things that I have to do in order to accomplish them, they're possible. So, and I can give you many examples of that across my own life, across other people's lives, of what we have achieved. I once participated in a marathon off the couch, so I know what that example and experience looks like, of only having been able to run 2 or 3 miles and then get up and say, I'm going to run 26 miles today. It was a very painful endeavor, and your mind is capable. I finished, but I didn't run a marathon. Now, 10 years later, when I understand better commitments of what that means, I'm going to train for another marathon. And I'm committing to that today, that I will at some point run another marathon, much older, but in way better shape and way better mental preparation for how to run a marathon. And so what I've learned in that experience was, I didn't have a plan. I just had a go one foot in front of the other approach. But this time around, I have a plan. And I don't know if that plan will be yet, whether it will be in 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, but I'm going to tell you, I will have a plan. I will have a cadence. I will have a training regimen. And when it comes time to do that, I'll be proud of the results, because I will have put in the hard work, the commitment. I will have faced adversity, maybe injuries, but I will have accomplished all the things that I need. And that's something that you can be really proud of. and understand the rewards of those endeavors. So we've talked a little bit about breaking them down into bite-sized pieces. So for example, here's a good guide on this. Let's say I want to launch a new product line and I want to achieve that at some point into my year 2. Let's say I want to plan a family vacation each year to be able to rest. Let's say I want to get into a leadership course, or I want to read a certain number of books as self-development. These are all good examples of strategic goals that we can put out there. Then what's going to happen is, as we talked about, how do you break that into bite-sized pieces? So here's a good example of how we take these things that are now 3 years out and we begin to start working backwards on each one. So we talked about, if I've got a 3-year vision, why do I want to accomplish that vision? That's the other thing that is really important. Is it's easy to put things on paper, but if you can't answer the why very clearly and concisely, I would encourage you to change what that vision goal is. And often we think of things we want to accomplish, but if we don't know the why, it's probably not that important enough. And in reality, our commitment to that goal is not going to be as high. So next thing is, we're going to work backwards on what are the things that need to happen in year 2? What are the actions that need to happen? And how are we going to measure that? Okay, very important. If we don't have measuring sticks to the things that we set out to do, then guess what? We are likely not to hit them. It's just like a target. If I don't have a target that I'm aiming for, how am I going to measure whether I hit it or not? And unfortunately, many of us don't set a target. And why don't we set a target? Because it's really uncomfortable to have to acknowledge I didn't meet my target, right? That's uncomfortable. But it takes courage to actually put a firm target in place, commit to it, share it with others, have accountability to it. And then guess what? It's okay. You don't have, you either hit it or you didn't. That's just a reality. The point is, did you put something in place and did you make forward progress towards achieving your goals? Right? That's really what's important here. And it's not about being down or diminished or feeling disappointed or shame if you don't accomplish all the things that you want. It's about, are you making a plan so that you give yourself the best opportunity, and are you committing to that so that you're making forward progress? Initially, what do I need to do? I need to set foundational things. What things do I need to put in my life in order to help me accomplish this? So we talked a little bit about that. What are my current resources? What resources do I need to have? Who are the people that are going to help me along the way? Whether those are mentors, whether those are trainers, whether those are books, again, in whatever form they are, people, books, whether those are people to help hold me accountable. And then as we break this down, is going to be list the objectives that need to happen in order for each one of those things. We're going to get into kind of the tactical part of that. So again, we'll send you a sample plan that you can begin to start working through these things. And then what this talks about is, again, how are you going to define what has to happen each quarter in order to start moving you in a direction of that? So quarter 1 might just be literally, I want to put together a plan, for instance, to improve a customer experience. Great. Well, first of all, do we know what the current customer experience is? That might be a good starting point. So maybe one of the things that we have to do is we have to figure that out. So we got to put together some feedback, a feedback loop. We got to find a way, whether it's through an email, whether it's through a survey, to get clients, whether it's asking them, hey, I want to get your feedback on what your experience in working with me actually looks like. Well, now we have data. And why is that important? Because if we don't have data of knowing where we are today, how do we know where we're starting from? Right? It's just like having those measurable goals that we need to have. We also have to have good data in terms of where we're beginning this process. So conducting the feedback, right? So going through this, then designing a plan for how we're going to improve upon that. That takes time, and it might be time you need to commit. It might be getting other people involved in that process. And then at some point, we're going to roll that out so that we have a mechanism. We're going to have certain whether it's, again, an email, whether it's a paper survey, whatever the case might be, and then we're going to be able to review it on a regular basis. And then we're going to take that information and figure out, how do we now put it into practice to improve what the experience looks like? And guess what? We're going to do it all over again. Because at some point now, once we start taking action on these items, we're going to figure out, what is that information telling us? What's this data reporting to us that we can now have as a measurable means to continue to enhance our offering, and whatever that objective is. Maybe it's in your business, you want to get more referrals. It's a great way to grow your business, right? Is to get other people to refer more people in. Well, one of the things might be, how many referrals did you get over the last 2 years? If last year you got 8, this year you got 6 or 10, well, what's a realistic objective? And I will tell you that it's not infinite. That's not fair. But referrals are an interesting thing that when you ask in the right way and you frame it in a way that you understand, the person understands the value they're providing of introducing people to the business and they get value out of the business, it's likely going to be exponential to what you have today. And that might be literally your marketing strategy. I'm going to take my 6 to 8 referrals, I'm going to turn it into 50. And again, if you think that that's unattainable, I'm going to challenge you and say it's not unattainable. The question is, what would it take to get to 50? Now, it might take you getting uncomfortable, right? As we talked about, it might take a consistent effort, but it's very possible. And we'd have to measure, well, what would it look like if you got 50 referrals? Well, again, now we go through a matrix to say, what's my conversion? If I get 50 referrals, how many clients does that turn into? What does that process look like? What does that mean in terms of additional revenue to me? All these are things that we can measure, and we can begin to put a process in place around these particular action items tied to it. So how do you maintain accountability and track some of these things? So when we think about accountability, there's a few ways to do it. I would tell you, and I want to talk about this for a minute when we talk about accountability. I want to go back for just a moment and talk about how do we define a goal in a way that we can have accountability to it. And I alluded to this earlier, and I'm going to use the acronym SMARTER, SMARTER, as how we define our goals. So when you write a goal down as part of your vision, the S on SMARTER, it's an acronym. So the S stands for specific, significant, or stretching. I'm going to use specific for my particular purposes of this, but those are all different words that you could fill in for the S in SMARTER, specific. And I'm going to give you some examples of this here in a minute. The M stands for measurable, okay, or meaningful or motivational, but I'm going to use measurable as what I'm going to use my M for. The A stands for achievable. Could also be attainable or agreed upon. I'm going to use achievable. The R is realistic. Could also be relevant or rewarding. I like realistic as my R. T is going to be time bound. Could also be timely or trackable. I'm going to stick with time bound as my T. The E is going to be enthusiastically. Could also be ethical or enjoyable. Or elevate, which I might use as kind of a growth word, a synonym for growth. I would take all the things that are important to me that I think about as goals, and then I would begin to refine them according to this smarter path. Measurable. How will you measure the goal? How much? How often? How many? What specific feedback do you want to ensure that you're tracking? Okay. For achievable, so the A, goals need to push you. So first of all, is it possible? where I talked about earlier, when we put constraints on our goals, often that's going to restrict what might be achievable. Well, what am I going to do next? What's my next action item? Whether that's for the next day, for the next week, for the next quarter, you got to be able to keep moving yourself in a forward direction and take that information and use it. And I use the analogy of that as that's putting one foot in front of the other. And I meet people every day that's our natural subconscious tendency, right? Is I got to get from A to B. I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other. We're even told that from a child age is if you want to achieve your goals, just one foot in front of the other. If you want to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. Well, all that's not bad advice. It's just limited advice. The truth is, if I want to actually eat an elephant, if I want to actually get to my destination, the best thing I can do is probably draw a roadmap, figure out where am I today? Where do I want to go? What is the most efficient path for me to get there? Why? Because before I start taking steps, I want to make sure I'm heading in the right direction. And then I want to make sure, what do I need to do? If I just start running in my bare feet, that's not as efficient as if I put on the right shoes. Depending on where you're going, you might need running shoes, or you might need heels, right? So if we haven't evaluated what we're doing, we're probably not going to be as efficient to get to where we want to be. And so all of this comes back to plan out where you want to be and then work your plan. right? These are very common themes we hear. I think the tactical is now, okay, that's great. That sounds good in theory, but how do I do that? Well, we start writing things down. That's the most effective practice is we start with big picture. Where do I want to be in 3 years? Okay, great. What does my life look like? Now let's whittle that back and say, what do I need to start doing today in order to start moving myself in that forward direction, understanding that results do get exponential and they accelerate the closer that I get to them. So again, it's not linear, it is exponential. And then once you start moving back to 1 year, once we now have the next year in focus of all the things that you want to achieve as a plan, if you have additional questions, please shoot us an email, info@Imagine Coworking. Please check out our website. Please go on and provide some feedback. Send me an email. Check out our Google page. Check out our social media pages, which are now resurrected. So follow us on our channels. So we've got a Facebook channel, Instagram channel, YouTube channel that'll start having videos posted regularly. Please go on and follow us. And so I appreciate you attending today. Thanks so much. Good luck on your journey, and we're here to help in all ways that we can.